I'm Josh Gibson, former AFL athlete. I want to ensure that racing's round for the next generations.
From the back blocks to the executive suites.
I need to embark on a journey which is going to involve me looking inside this industry and really making sure that horse welfare is at the front of their minds.
The horses may be under a bit of pressure and shouldn't be racing at the moment.
They're not commodities, they're animals and they're beautiful.
So what have you got in place to look after them?
It's all about making the right decisions for the horse.
It's actually blown me away. We always want to win, but how hard is it to judge that versus horses' welfare?
We all know when a horse isn't right. I find horses that are educated well at the start, when you get them off the track, they already have the basics.
It can be a grand final, could be millions of dollars on the line, but that's horse racing.
They're such a beautiful animal and they deserve to be in a beautiful home and well loved.
There's probably nothing else I'd rather do in the world.
Just a flavour there of Here for the Horses. And Josh, as you put all that together, I mean, you're a horse lover. We didn't get the very beginning, but you were fawning over a foal, and you clearly love the sport, have done since you were very young. How far did this open your eyes in terms of welfare and perhaps stories that aren't generally told?
Yeah, look, it did open my eyes. I'd say I'm not a huge lover of thoroughbred racing as such. I enjoy the sport. My passion is camp drafting and cutting, so the Western disciplines. And I guess, growing up in Melbourne and ultimately playing professional football here in Melbourne, you get to experience a lot of things that come around with horse racing and you get to see, I guess, people's take on the sport. And I think being able to do this documentary and come in from a neutral standpoint and being able to, sit on the fence and say to Racing Vic and Channel 7, well, we're not coming here to make a feel-good story for you. I want to go in and analyse what's actually going on in the market and, in these training facilities and see whether these owners, thoroughbred trainers, are actually here for horse welfare or whether they're just here to make a buck and flick that nag on, as we heard earlier.
But you certainly got a sense of the amount of data available to trainers to make assessments about the conditions of the horses, which perhaps was beyond your expectation.
Yeah, it really was. And that's, one of the areas I was most impressed about. And Christopher just mentioned in his story about, CT scans, not being able to pick up those things. And I think back to every hamstring that I tore during my 13 years of playing. And if I actually think about those training sessions before, I had a moment where I knew I probably wasn't right and something didn't quite feel right. And we chose to run the gauntlet as such, and you end up with a big scar after surgery. So then I look forward into my career and see the type of data that we started using for recovery. And, we look at running in different zones and ensuring that I've got top end speed when you're coming back from an injury and running certain amount of Ks. And then when you go out to, a Danny O'Brien and you see that they're putting the same sort of systems in place with their track work and ensuring that they're looking at stride lengths and they're looking at, the heartbeat of these horses and how hard they're working to get that normal stride length that they're used to, ensuring that the patterns are the same, to making sure that they can, compete as athletes on the weekend, because ultimately as an athlete, that's what you have to do. You're fine-tuning yourself to the point of going over the edge, but doing it in a manner through technology that allows you to compete at the highest standard. And seeing those type of systems being brought into place in the racing industry was a real eye-opener for me and something that I really enjoyed seeing.
There's clearly a message that needs to be pumped out if it's to be picked up. I'm interested that when you were talking earlier, Denise, you picked up on breaking in as a problematic use of language, and Josh had said exactly the same, actually. Breaking in, it sounds, pretty archaic, sounds pretty brutal if you don't know what you're talking about. But that struck you in terms of language, Josh. What do you replace it with?
Oh, look, it's a hard one. As we said, breaking in, it's ultimately you're educating a horse from a young age. And when you're speaking to the people that aren't horse lovers and you talk about breaking in, they have no idea what they're talking about. And recently, I was in America with our company Foresight, and I had one of our other employees there, and he was trying to tell a trainer that he wanted them to try our product on his broke horse. And so he was trying to tell them that he wanted their most banged up horse to use the product. And the trainer's thinking, oh, you want my broke horse, the best horse I've broken in, who's the most trained one I've got here. So it is some really hard terminology for the outside world. And, it'd be something that'd be nice to change. I don't know if we're going to be able to do it because it's something that, trainers call themselves breakers and whatnot. But I think the more that we can probably open our eyes and think about some of that speak and what we use will definitely have a positive effect on the racing consumer out there that isn't really educated in the deep horse aspects of racing.
Whatever it ends up being called, we'll come to it again in a little bit later. I think you made a point also that process is so critical to a horse when it looks at a second career or retirement, that it's of use, that it's educated, if you like, in terms of the ways in which it might have to work with humans in other ways.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably, if there's one thing I think that we can get better at, it's the breaking in education process. We sit up here and we talk about retraining to rehome these horses, and if a thoroughbred wants to come off the track that wasn't fast enough to run or whatever it is, and wants to become a dressage or a kid's show jumping horse, and it's never had the breaking in and been told to tie up and be comfortable being tied up, or had its feet picked up so it can get its feet trimmed, and all these fundamentals that you need to learn from such a young age to ensure that whatever your career is, you can be successful in it, then these horses are really going to struggle to be rehomed. And what I've seen a lot is, the industries that I'm in the cutting and camp drafting, there's a big emphasis on that early education. And what's really pleasing is some of those top trainers that I know are now getting horses from thoroughbred trainers to get them broken in there, because they're really starting to understand just how important those early aspects of teaching a horse the right disciplines to ensure whatever it goes on to do, whether it's a paddock buddy, as I said, a dressage horse or a kid's first pony, that it's safe and can have a career post-racing, wherever that racing career finishes.
So we've got this parallel of improving standards to help horses, but it's there to also improve perceptions that those standards are being brought into play. Chris, you said we must face issues with honesty. There are some areas where it's not that clear, is it? Where is it a welfare issue? Is it a perception issue? I mean, the whip is the eternal sort of whipping boy of that issue. Is the whip a welfare issue?
Well, I guess strictly you'd have to say it is, because you're aiming to inflict an element of discomfort to elicit a response. I think there are far more important welfare issues, and I think...
but there aren't many more important perception issues.
Totally. No, absolutely, I get that. But that's again where we probably need to be careful, and this is about welfare. It's not about perception. We had all the stuff talking about getting more people in the sport, etc. This is a very important component of getting people in the sport, but the focus should be on welfare, what really matters to the horse, not what matters to the people to making people look good. Whether you use breaking or whatever is important for selling the sport in a good light, but for the horse, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's how you do it that matters.
Grace, what do you think?
In terms of
the whip and in fact the welfare issue, the importance of it. I mean, Chris obviously comes from as you both do, from a very strong veterinary background, and the horse is what matters. But we all know that people do make assumptions. That's why Denise is sitting up here to try and work them out a little bit better.
I think they're both equally important, but as Chris has highlighted, they're different problems that are solved in different ways. When you have a real equine welfare issue, and we know that there are some of them, the chronic injuries that Chris spoke to, they have a different way of solving them compared to issues that might be more of a public perception, like the naming of educating or breaking in. So they're issues that the industry needs to address. You just come at them from different directions.
You also said in your presentation, which I thought was very interesting, injury is a part of sport, death is not. Look, you want honesty. Death is part of the sport of racing, isn't it?
I don't think that it should be. We know that we cannot say that we can get to a point where there would be no horses that would be put down as a result of racing. But what we can do is say that we're going to put in place measures to try to reduce the risk of a horse having an injury. So we can't say that we can stop it, but we can do our best to minimise it. I mean, the example we have here is like the road toll. We don't want to have car crashes and we don't want to have fatal injuries in car crashes. We're going to aim to get that towards zero, but we know that that's going to be really challenging to meet that place.
Denise, how do you square this circle in terms of people understanding better? Because you don't like the word educate particularly, do you? I think you see it as more subtle than that.
There's a place for education, I think, but I think we also rely too heavily on education. How many times have you done courses and things like that where actually we're just telling people what they should do, actually leading through things and working with them and creating other circumstances and understanding why people are doing what they're doing is really important. Often, particularly, and I'm not talking about the outside the industry, but inside the industry, people probably know what they should be doing and what is best practice, but why are they not? It's got nothing to do with education. So understanding their drivers and underlying things, and it might be that's the way I've always done things. So there's habit there. The underlying assumption of how they actually feel. Is there true horse-centered care there? Who knows? You know, so there's a lot of drivers. Money is one of the biggest drivers, and actually that means that money, it becomes one of the biggest, hardest problems to solve. Whenever there's money involved, we know that because the driver for that in an economic world that we live in means that it makes it very, very difficult to change behaviours. But if we can shift social norms, those people who aren't doing the desirable behaviours becomes less and less, and actually the perception outside can build on that. You know, as it shows in the Here for the Horses, it's a fantastic documentary that really showed that actually the majority of people are doing the right thing, but those who aren't, if we make them the real outlier, and some people might say that they are, but actually there's more to be done there.
That's where the evidence, Chris, kicks in that you're talking about, and the need for more research into what some of these problems are.
Yes, we need really good quality evidence that we can really trust, but also we need people like Denise to help the scientists project it in a format that is accessible to other people, but also we need people who are at the cutting edge, who can make the difference, to hear what's being said and choose to do something differently because of it. And that's very difficult and very challenging, particularly in horse racing, which is so steeped in tradition and set ways of doing things in certain areas.
I mean, the film that you put together, Josh, with Racing Victoria, is a very strong, positive take on welfare issues, on how horses are being looked after. We had Eddie Everywhere here yesterday, who was talking about the importance of getting news programs involved in these issues. They would be, if I'm being honest, they would probably be more sceptical going into this than perhaps your program would point towards. Would you still think that is a good thing? Do you think that the overall message you saw was an unequivocally positive one?
That I experienced during the documentary? Yeah, it was. And, you know, if you were to grade everyone that I every farm I went to, every trainer I met, you know, and they're not all as good as each other, but in terms of being above a pass line, yes, it was there. Are there plenty of people that we didn't get to see to go and visit that are below that line? Yeah, there are too. So, and really, it's about those people that are below the line, them really getting fed what the above the line people are doing, and really, you know, almost forcing it on them that it's either this way or there's no more for you. So, and until we can probably have that super hard stance on someone that's not towing the line, you're always gonna be striving for utopia, but you won't get there.
And Hallie, you've given us an example where hundreds of thousands have come to see for themselves with their own eyes, get their own experience on how well horses are being treated and what a wonderful sort of world they can have. But in the grand scheme of things, 200,000 is not a drop in the bucket, is it? So what else can you do to broaden that sort of, to open that opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in Kentucky, I don't know if many of you all have visited, we've become very well known for our bourbon as well as our horses. And horse country is very much so modeled off of a marketing effort by the distilleries called the Bourbon Trail. And they just welcomed over 2 million visitors in 2022. Now, they started back in 1999. They welcomed 1 million guests, I believe, in 2016. They hit the 1.7 million mark in 2019 and have just reached the 2 million mark of guests. So the scope is there. I think also, at Horse Country, we don't want to necessarily be a zoo where we're open all day long and you can come see the horses in their pens or their cages if you can. So we're still really trying to balance truly authentic experiences. But I think, I want us to get to the point where that 200,000 number is a year, not 7. And I think we have the commitment from our members to grow that scale. And hopefully we'll continue to widen the pot. I mean, again, 23 members. We have some 450 farms, thoroughbred farms specifically, in central Kentucky. So there's room for us to continue to grow and to connect with more people.
So get it to spread till it's the norm, which is essentially what Josh is saying as well. Get that spread. Can we just focus for a moment on the protocol for the Melbourne Cup? And as Chris pointed out, a certain resistance pushback, I think you called it, from certain parts of the world, which you found disappointing, Chris. I'm sure you did as well. I'm just wondering what you felt the perception was for that pushback. I mean, you alluded to it, but was it a sense that you felt that they were being excluded because they were too competitive, or did they not really get it?
I couldn't speak for people, but I can explain some of the feedback that we did directly have, and there's no hiding that there was a sense that perhaps, although it was definitely not our intention was to avoid injuries in our international competitors. I mean, these are champion horses that don't come along every day. Trainers will tell you that, and if you've got one, you want to keep it as happy and healthy and racing as long as it can. So that was definitely not our intention, but there was a bit of misinformation or an underlying feeling from some of the international competitors that we were being a bit parochial and wanted a local horse to win the race. And I mean, there was no substance behind that, but there was definitely that feeling. But all I can do is reinforce that, we had a problem. We went through a really thorough process of trying to identify, what were the risks, which ones could we look to reduce, and then we came out with this raft of recommendations. And they're definitely challenging for trainers to step through. We're constantly working. We were only 2 years in, and so each year we're reflecting on the process, trying to find ways to make it easier for our international trainers to engage with so that they can come. But, we had horses in the first year. We had the horse State of Rest that went through all the processes, came over and won our Cox Plate. Last year, we had a number of international horses come over and compete really well and place in the Melbourne Cup. So I think as people see it's possible to do, that will definitely give them some confidence.
The proof of the pudding, ultimately, which has to go on year after year. Josh?
Just to jump in on that, ultimately there were horses in Australia that got scratched because of this as well, and I think that for some of these trainers, the next level is trying to think like an athlete. And I know myself, if I was getting on a plane and I was flying to play in Perth, I wouldn't be getting off the plane and training hard that day. I'd be worried about doing soft tissue. If I've at the end of the season and it's backed up and we've done a lot of training, my training sessions get shorter. And I think when you start thinking that way and you understand why these scanning and procedures are in place, it's because they can be at a different stage in their season-long campaign. They've been on different surfaces. You're going to be fatigued in different ways. And the only way to pick up those indiscretions in horses is by scanning them at that level, because these are such minute things. And I think if you take away the we're trying to help local horses win, and you actually think about it from an athletic perspective on what these horses are going through and where they are in their program, then the scanning makes sense to ensure that on game day, we have the best horses racing in the best condition possible, so we get to see an absolute spectacle, and it doesn't matter whether it's who the trainer is. That's the ultimate of what we want to see. and that every horse passes the line at the end, and we can celebrate the race for what it was and not the injuries that took place.
There's a lot about the clarity of the communication of what that message is. Sorry, Chris, you were going to pick up on the protocol.
Just knowing some of the vets back in the UK who and their complaint is that they feel that there isn't the science behind it really to back up, to make the sort of critical decisions you're making. And there's certainly something to be said for that. But also I don't think they quite get the severity of the pressure. You cannot afford to have another horse breakdown, really. So that's why, and perhaps maybe it is a bit preemptory to make some of the calls without a lot of the real depth of what does this really mean. So they're quite safety calls. But I think that was some of the concern. And of course, that's going to change with time as you build up knowledge and confidence. Alec, but that's only a UK feedback from it anyway. So
Well, I think it's just such an interesting point, again, of where welfare and perception meet, right in the middle, and how intertwined both of them really are in our continued success and that social license for us to operate.
I have a feeling that, Denise, they'll want to engage you quickly to start bringing in some of your expertise to start making the difference straight away. It can't come too soon, but this is a very drip process, isn't it? Changing behaviour is a very long-term project.
It's a highly complex issue. Let's be honest, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of different things, but there's some quick wins that you can be doing. In Hong Kong at the moment, obviously, I heard on Tuesday that they've started doing like a retirement fund. So the minute that you take on a horse or anything like that and it goes through, at the end, there's a pot of money ready to go. Here, we've been talking about a super, which is basically retirement as well. So a super fund or different things that means that at the end of the time, when a horse is finished, that it will have a pot of money, and it shouldn't just be relied on, because we know that there's different things and there's a lot of things medically and everything else that could go wrong. But it means that it's showing that people have actually got that investment, that it's not just for that period of time. And actually, that might sound like a very simple thing, but the messaging, again, that comes around that, so this is where education can be good, and the narrative around it is we care for that horse, we're putting that at the centre, we realise that racing is only this part of its life, we're putting that forward. Imagine that as a story then that goes out into the community, and here's that a little bit more. And let's embrace that in some of our language that we use. So when you're introducing, heard in the last section, a lot that sounded like business and the owner and they're the contractor and sounded like something like a bank for me. And even changing that type of language might be something that actually will engage people a little bit more, because the more you call it a business, the more that the general public who disagree with it, some of the actions and things that are going on, the more you're going to get compared to the banks and the people that don't do the right things, and there's always corruption and this, that and the other. Let's change the language. And when an owner comes in, yes, they're really important, but also, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the lady that was talking, but those contracts around the start of, actually, this is your responsibility, this is what you're signing up to, and having more of that as general practice can help to shift some of those things. So there's some quick win things that can be done straight away, and then there's that long-term plan, which is obviously, again, Racing Victoria has started talking about those in their strategy.
Well, you brought them to the fore here this morning extremely well. Thank you very much indeed for that, and for tackling some of these issues about welfare. I sense a certain degree of frustration from you, Chris, still about the need for more investment, for more research, because if you're not seen to be doing it for a start, then really are you putting the horse first? But can I just say for all our panellists, very many thanks for your contributions. Thank you.